All right. You're live.
Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us this afternoon, this lovely rainy Friday afternoon, if you're anywhere here in South Central Pennsylvania. Thanks for joining us here at Harrisburg University for our new HU webinar series. Gosh, this is number 7 or 8 of our series so far, and today we're very pleased to have some distinguished faculty with us to talk about our forensics concentration within our integrative sciences program. Before I introduce them, I do want to let everyone know that you are automatically muted. This is a webinar format, so you won't be able to raise your hand or speak, but we do want to hear from you. This is very important that we get as many questions from the audience as possible. You will see a Q&A area. It might look a little different depending on whether or not you're on a computer or on a phone or a mobile device. But it's a little icon with a question mark where you can ask questions. The questions won't be published unless I publish them, and we will be doing a Q&A session at the end of the presentation. You can ask questions at any time, but we'll get to them in the last 10, 15, 20 minutes of the presentation. So please do ask away. We are also recording this event. Once it is downloaded and available, we will email it out to everyone who has registered. I know that we have a very wide audience. We have parents, we have some sophomores, juniors. We also have high school seniors who have not applied to school yet, and some that have already been accepted, and we have some that have already committed themselves to HU and came here today to learn more about the program and meet some faculty. So we welcome all of you. We hope you have a great time and you learn everything you wanted to know about forensics in the next 45 minutes. So with that, I'd like to let you know who we have today. We have 2 of our forensics professors here to speak with you. We have Professor Jill Yackel and Professor Carrie Wise. I'm going to be turning it over to them. They have a nice presentation planned for you. And then once they conclude with that, we'll get back to the Q&A. So thank you very much for being here again, and I'm now going to turn it over to Professor Carrie Wise.
Hi, welcome. Thank you for joining us today. Professor Yackel is going to prepare the presentation. So I am Professor Carrie Wise, and I have been in the field of forensics actually as a practitioner for the past 12 years. I'm relatively new to academia and to Harrisburg University, but excited to help build a new program that we've been working on. So I began my education at a local university in Baltimore, or outside of Baltimore, at Villa Julie College, and I have an undergrad degree in biology and a master's of science in forensic science. I always had a very keen eye for science, but I always wanted to find different ways to be able to apply science. So that is how I fell into the field of forensic science. When I was starting my education, there was a lot of programs such as CSI and the other crime scene investigation shows that had just kind of popped up. I grew up watching an old show, I think it was probably 1970s, which was Quincy. So, which had a medical examiner in it. So that's really what started my passion for forensic science. As I went through my education and I went through my career, I've been able to do so many different things in forensic science. And I love the fact that you're not limited to necessarily one discipline. So over the past 12 years, I've held positions as a crime scene technician, a drug chemist, and last 8 years were spent as a trace evidence examiner. So that's my background. And like I said, I'm relatively new to Harrisburg University, but what drew me to this university and to the program was the fact that they offer and they require internships as well as a lot of hands-on learning, direct contact with mock casework, trying to give our students the best foot forward. So that'll be discussed a little bit later along the presentation. So again, welcome to our program. So I know everyone's muted, but I would like you to take the time to think, what is forensic science? If you were on the stand today and someone asked you, what is forensic science? How would you consider explaining that to people? a lot of people really don't know, and that's okay because there's a lot of different information out there. Normally, I like to poll the audience and figure out what shows do you watch. They're really, really big in influencing a lot of our students, which is great. But it's also really different from, sometimes can be very different from what we do. So shows like, or the whole entire series of crime scene investigation, CSI, that's a really interesting show. It's very dramatized. It's not necessarily completely accurate. In all of my years of crime scene investigation, I can promise you I never showed up to a crime scene in a nice suit and high heel shoes and no protective equipment provided. But it's still fun, and it gives you a different way to look at things. We have other shows that can be a little bit offer a little bit more information that's a little bit valid. One of those shows is Forensic Files. They're actually based off of real cases. But as we look at the term forensic science, we're thinking simply as any type of science that has an application to the law. So it doesn't automatically mean we're talking about criminal law. It can also be civil cases. It can be even cases that involve wildlife and the protection of different species. So forensic science is a really large field. A lot of people may not realize that there's so many other applications that fall within the realm of forensics because of that simple application to a law. So even accountants can have forensic accounting, forensic odontologists who are going to look at teeth, like forensic dentistry. So forensic document examiner or fraud. So many different professions can have that forensic or that application to the law applied to them. And that's what makes forensic science great, is we can be a relatively small field, but full of so many different offerings. So within the common fields of forensic science, and when we look at our students and figure out what a lot of them are interested in, these are the main disciplines that are included. When we talk about biology, forensic biology, we're talking about looking and identifying potential bodily fluids. Also using DNA, are we able to determine any information about an individual by looking at the DNA, identify suspects, identify remains? So it's a very interesting topic that really has changed a lot. Since 1985 was the first technique developed, and really recently, just until 2006, was a developed that we commonly use. But that's a discipline that's going to have constant changes. And even today, with all the different platforms in which they request DNA, we've been finding out about different suspects being identified based off of these familiar DNA analyses. Toxicology, excellent field where you're going to be looking at different percentages of compounds within a person to determine their relative effects on somebody. And shout out to Professor Yeakel, as this is her field of expertise. For chemistry, that can be a really large field, but a lot of times that falls under drug chemistry. So our controlled dangerous substances, CDS, different drugs, cocaine, marijuana, heroin, are we able to identify and maybe even determine how much of those drugs are present in a sample? Trace evidence is a huge, awesome field. I am biased, that is my field, but that's going to be where we talk about anything that has a chemical structure. Hairs, fibers, glass, gunshot residue, paint, accelerants, arson, tons of wonderful stuff. Fingerprints. It's important that not only in crime scene that we understand how we recover fingerprints, but also that how do we analyze the fingerprints? How do we determine, are we able to identify somebody based off the prints, or how much weight to give to that evidence? Firearms is extremely helpful at crime scenes. Potentially being able to link a suspect to the crime scene or a suspect's firearm to a projectile found within a victim, extremely important, as well as using trajectory, looking at different angles, even determining the sequence of events. All of that can be extremely helpful in an investigation. Bloodstain pattern, a lot of people have maybe watched the show Dexter or other shows similar to that. It is a really awesome science, and people don't realize it's backed by physics. So we're able to have that scientific background and look at the different patterns within blood or different minutiae details within the blood to try to figure out what may have happened at a crime scene. So really amazing stuff. Pathology, that's a larger field than I think a lot of people realize, but that's great. We have our medical examiners, our forensic pathologists. They're going to be the ones responsible to determine the cause and manner of death. You know, did someone die by homicide? Was it maybe a natural cause or accidental? Extremely important, brings closure to the family. But also with pathology, you have them looking at the cells, determining if potentially antifreeze was added to a mixture. Stomach contents. So that's a really large field that is extremely interesting and still changing. Forensic anthropology is an amazing asset to have to any type of investigation in what you have remains that are just bones. How are you able to assist in determining, can we identify this individual? Can we look at the bones and figure out maybe the age, sex, ancestry estimation? We have forensic psychology and computer forensics. Both of them are going to be based within their original platforms for that concentration. And then you're going to figure out that forensic application to them. How does that help with our investigations to the law? We also have entomology, the study of insects. Are we able to look at the insect population maybe found on decomposing matter and determine that PMI or that postmortem interval, maybe how long ago that person passed away? Entomology can also serve for looking at secondary crime scenes. Am I finding bugs that are not native to Pennsylvania at my crime scene? You know, what could that mean for the investigation? That could be huge. And again, as I mentioned before, we have wildlife, trying to determine if somebody has poached, killed an animal that is not within the normal hunting season, or animals that might be further protected. And that's actually a relatively large realm in the federal government as well. So forensics at Harrisburg offers a lot of different excellent points for students. We have a diverse coursework that we're offered. We want to make sure that we appeal to a lot of different students' interests and that the students we have, once they graduate, they're well-rounded. They have the ability to cross over into different types of specific forensic jobs. We also offer small class sizes. A lot of our forensic courses are capped at 12 students because we offer lecture, but a lot of hands-on activities even built into the course themselves. On top of those lab activities, we also have an internship. You have to perform an internship at Harrisburg University, and Professor Yeagle will talk more about that with the internship and the research. But you have to have 2 semesters of hands-on research. So this is normally not commonly seen until you get into your master's or higher level of your science study. So this is a great opportunity and is really a great indicator for people in the workforce when they're trying to find applicants for jobs. It's not very likely in academia that you're going to have somebody with 2 whole semesters working on one big scientific project. We're also very close to the Dauphin County Courthouse and the Dauphin County Coroner's Office. We have an excellent relationship with them. A lot of our students have not only go to visit, but have also interned at the Dauphin County Coroner's Office. Students from Harrisburg University, like the photograph on the left, shows a group of our students attending the Dauphin County Courthouse. We regularly will go there throughout the semester to have the students become familiar with the different law processes, as well as just to kind of get familiar to the courtroom, because that could be quite intimidating. The best thing that brought me to Harrisburg University and that makes me most proud of our program is the fact that we have all faculty, we are all practitioners. We have done the job, we have been out on the crime scenes. It's very hard to explain sometimes our jobs unless you've been in that situation. So it's nice to be able to offer the students those real life simulations or interpretations of the evidence as if you can present it to them as if they're there. So I think that's what's most critical. We have members from the General Attorney's Office, members from the Dauphin County Coroner's Office. We have a forensic entomologist on site who teaches with us as well. So we have a great diverse field of faculty members that are always offering their firsthand life experiences to our students.
So I am Professor Jill Yakel, and I'm going to take over now. I'll give it a second to switch over. So I thought I would start first by talking a little bit about my background, and then I'll go into some of the learning opportunities that we offer at Harrisburg. So I got my undergrad at Lock Haven University. I actually did a concentration in DNA forensics. Like Professor Wise said, that's when CSI was really coming out and becoming really popular, and I thought it was an exciting field, and I really enjoyed science, and I thought it was a great way to kind of give back to society as well. So I got interested in DNA forensics, and then I decided to pursue a master's degree. So I also have a Master of Science in Forensic Science that I got from Arcadia University. And working there, I actually started teaching a little bit and did a lot of forensic research. So where I worked was a research center where we would teach classes, but also do a ton of research in forensic science specifically. About a little less than 10 years ago, when all of the synthetic cannabinoids, the K2 spice, bath salts, all of that were coming out, we started doing the initial testing on that to try and see what drugs were out there, what drugs were being put onto different plant material people were using instead of marijuana. And then we actually went to different electronic dance music festivals and collected urine, blood, and oral fluid from the participants to try and see what drugs were actually out there and people were taking. So that was a lot of fun. And we did a whole bunch of other research as well, mostly toxicology focused, but I've done some research in DNA, trying to recover DNA from bombs recovered safe. So instead of, the bomb doesn't go off, but they actually make it so that it does not explode, trying to figure out if you can still recover DNA from cases like that as well, and all sorts of other things. Then I moved on to the Armed Forces Medical Examiner's Office, where I helped run the Special Forensic Toxicology Lab, where we did a lot of the synthetic cannabinoids and bath salts as well. After that, I ran a clinical toxicology lab for several years and a clinical blood testing lab, and then I came to HU. And as Professor Wise said, I really like HU. They understand the importance of practical experience and students actually getting hands-on opportunities. So they're very supportive, and it's really exciting that we can offer the students so many hands-on activities to be able to actually experience what you should instead of just reading it in a book or hearing about someone telling you about it. So some of the classes we offer, these are a majority of the forensic courses that we offer. We typically start with our Introduction to Forensic Science course, which is a great overview of the different fields in forensic science. So it goes into a brief introduction into fingerprinting, blood spatter, pretty much all the disciplines that Professor Wise already talked about, we cover on a base level. And then that kind of allows the student to understand what areas they're interested in and what fields they really want to pursue, so they can focus and tailor their education from that point on. We also offer crime scene investigation and management, which is typically, how do you assess a crime scene? How do you approach it? How would you collect evidence? How would you process some of that evidence that needs to be processed at an actual crime scene? We do offer several very hard science classes that are, I don't mean hard as in difficult, I mean hard as in they're more based in the chemistry, biology, and physics fields. So that would be things like forensic entomology, where we learn a lot about different insects and how they, their life cycles. So how you could tell, like she had mentioned before, the postmortem interval, or even if a body has moved, so where those insects may have come from. Forensic anthropology, which is actually taught by the coroner at Dauphin County Coroner's Office. So that's a really exciting course where you can get, incredibly hands-on experience. Where you learn a lot about different bones, how you could look at a pelvis to determine gender, how you could look at skulls to determine gender, maybe looking at the femur to determine height of an individual, all of that kind of information. Medical legal death investigation is similar, goes a lot more into how you would actually investigate a death, from the autopsy, collecting the evidence, putting it all together, and trying to figure out how someone actually died. And then we have the four main classes in forensic science that are forensic chemistry, trace evidence, forensic biology, and forensic toxicology. As you see, some of these are bold and italic. These are actually new courses that we are just offering as of this year. We are working to get our program FEPAC accredited. So the Forensic Science Education Program Accreditation Commission. Sorry, that's a mouthful. So we are working to get that accreditation, and so we've had to offer an increased amount of some of these science courses, which we think is really exciting. Both Professor Wise and I went to accredited programs, and it really opens up the field for you as you're looking for job opportunities. It also mandates certain criteria, which HU already meets most of that criteria. So in the trace evidence course, you would handle most of the evidence like Professor Wise talked about, so hair and fibers and glass analysis, gunshot residue. Forensic biology, we go into a lot of the serology, which is the identification of bodily fluids. So when someone's at a crime scene, there may be a red stain. That doesn't necessarily mean we collect it, we take it back and do DNA testing. Right? Before that, we have to actually figure out, is that blood or is it some other red stain? And if it is blood, is it human blood or is it from an animal or something else? So that's the initial part, and then going into a lot more about DNA forensics and how DNA is used. And like you said, this is a really new field when you consider some of the other fields. Only since 1985, really, this has been something that we're capable of doing, identifying people based on their DNA. And then forensic toxicology, that is my background. So as she said, I'm very biased. I think this is a really fun class. But we learn a lot about drugs, the pharmacology behind drugs. So how does your body interact with drugs? How do the drugs interact with your body? Different effects that are seen, what drugs are out there, what you might encounter, and then how we test those drugs as well. And determine things like a DUI. Is someone actually drunk and driving under the influence of alcohol or other drugs? Or even post-mortem, did someone overdose? Or were they exposed to a drug which caused them to get into an accident or something like that? So the classes that I've listed on the left are mostly part of our FEPAC program, whereas it will be a forensic science degree. The courses on the right go along more with your criminal justice or forensic investigative track. So we have things like fraud investigation and interrogation techniques. I've heard a lot of great things with interrogation techniques. We have students will actually go into an interrogation room and be interrogated and try to understand things like, you know, will you give a false confession and things like that, and understanding some of those principles behind how some of those instances might come up. We have evidence, which is a really great course that combines the law side as well as the science side. So it's understanding the different laws for how evidence needs to be collected or handled or processed or presented in court, as well as a scientist, how do we need to appropriately collect it and things like that. Forensic population studies is kind of a forensic statistics class. So it's looking at large populations and how we can draw conclusions about that that have statistical significance. And then we have some other interesting but a little bit more specific courses like criminal profiling, which would go along with a psychology program, forensic computing, if you're really interested in the computer forensics world, and then forensic photography, which is a crucial base for doing any work at a crime scene, where you'd have to take pictures and collect all of your evidence. If you don't have a picture of it, it's really hard to justify where something was and describe how it looked, but pictures are great for that. And on the side of this slide, I do have, on the top is one of our laboratories. This just gives you a good idea of some of our lab benches and how some of the instrumentation is set up. And then on the bottom, that's one of our classrooms. So it's actually a picture of a camp, but you can see we have a relatively small class size that students are exposed to. So our students are required to participate in an internship. Students are required to complete 135 hours. And a lot of our students have taken internships at the Dauphin County Coroner's Office, as well as more recently the Harrisburg Bureau of Police. But there's a whole lot of opportunities out there. And one of the great things about Harrisburg is that not only is it required, but we have our own experiential learning department, which is really crucial in helping you obtain these internships. So they're constantly out there looking for new internship opportunities and connecting our students with appropriate opportunities. So you're not on your own trying to figure out where you can go, what you can get involved in. You basically tell them what you're interested in, and they'll give you a whole lot of options and different ideas on where you can start looking, depending on what you're interested in. So there's other medical examiners' offices, police departments. I personally interned at a police department, and I thought it was a great experience. I did not want to be a police officer, but it really gave me great insight into, how they actually handle a scene, why some evidence might not be pristine as it comes into the crime lab, and what types of, events they're encountering when they're at a crime scene. Even just like, where's the best place to get a fingerprint off of a stolen car? Stuff like that is really great exposure from a police department that if you end up working in a crime lab, you wouldn't necessarily know that information. And then the last one is the Pennsylvania State Police Forensic Crime Lab. We have one located very close to the school. So that's another great opportunity if you're interested in more of the lab work as well. And then I do want to spend some time talking about the research opportunities. Like Professor Wise said, this is a unique experience that Harrisburg not only offers, but requires. So it ensures that all of our students are getting this great hands-on experience. And in the forensics program, we just recently changed how we offer research. We do have 2 different options available to the students, which we felt was much better aligned with how forensic professionals actually act. So in a lot of the forensic field, there's not, if you're working in a crime lab, you're not necessarily doing a lot of research. Most of your time is focused on casework, and you don't have the resources available to perform research. So we didn't want our students going out into the field expecting to do a whole ton of research if that's not really what makes sense for them. So for students who are more interested in traditional research, we have the option to do student developed projects. So on this slide, I have listed a few of those options. I'm going to go through these because these are some of the most recent ones, and they were pretty exciting to hear about from the students. The first one is the effect of preservative solutions on liver cell structure. So if you look at the bottom, we have sections of cow kidney and pig liver that were soaked in various embalming fluid solutions. And basically the student, which you can see kind of on the bottom left, the student was taking that's a picture of the pig liver, slicing it into little sections. We soaked it in different preservative solutions, and then she was able to work with a histologist to actually slice it up, put it on some slides, look under the microscope, and determine how liver cell structure was impacted by being stored in various solutions. Another example of a project was we had a student work on the genetic role in fingerprint development. So a lot is known about fingerprint development, and a lot is not known about fingerprint development. So we know that it's dependent upon where the baby is in the womb and how the amniotic fluid composition is, where the baby, how they're moving at the time, as well as how your fingers are actually developing in the womb. But it's really not known how much of a genetic role there is in fingerprint development. We actually, on the right, you can see we did an article where we had a little news clip out there trying to get more people involved in this study. But we were asking for 3 generations to let us know what types of fingerprints they had to determine if they're the type of fingerprints. So there's 3 main types of fingerprints that are out there. If that actually has a genetic, I don't know, if that plays a role at all in fingerprint development. The next one is the postmortem effects of alcohol on human decomposition and microbial communities. So this student is actually working with worms. We unfortunately cannot have dead people to work on, so we choose the next best thing. So this student is doing alcohol poisoning on worms and trying to figure out how it impacts their postmortem interval. So if someone is, alcohol is somewhat of a preservative. So we were trying to figure out if this actually kills some of the bacteria, and so it slows down that progression of decomposition. And then the final project listed here is the impact of a potent CYP inhibitor, bergamottin, on the metabolism rate of diazepam using human liver microsomes and analysis via HPLC. So that's kind of a mouthful, but basically what that one is talking about is when people drink grapefruit juice, it tends to increase the potency or the effect of certain drugs. And so this patient or this student saw that there was an article written about it, and she became really interested, and she wanted to know that if you would compound whatever it is in the grapefruit juice with a drug, if you'd be able to take less of that drug and still get the same effect because of the presence of that grapefruit juice, which honestly, with how many overdoses there are out there and people taking so many medications now, this would be a huge benefit to the pharmacy industry. And so that's what this study was basically about, isolating that component in the grapefruit juice and then applying it with the specific drug. So in this case, diazepam or Valium, and seeing how the metabolism of that was impacted. So those are some of the research projects, and students come up with these. So that's what's really exciting as well, is that we don't tell you what you're working on. Students read a whole bunch of articles or just see a news show or something out there that they get excited about, and then they try and we help them develop some sort of research project out of that. But I did say that there's two types of opportunities for forensic students, and this would be our second opportunity that we have out there. We offer case studies where students, we've realized that they're not getting as much hands-on experience in some of the fields that they may be more interested in. And so what we have done is created this case study opportunity where students tell us a couple different fields that they're interested in, and then we design a case specifically involving those fields. So an example I'll use, and actually the case history that's in the top left here, this was the explosion of a meth lab. So for this student, they were given 3 different types of evidence. So they were given forensic chemistry, and that was to tell you that it was a meth lab. They were given gunpowder, which was why it actually caused an explosion. And they also had toxicology because it was a drunk driver that crashed into the meth lab, which then initiated the explosion. And so what's really fun about this is the students are given actual chain of custodies where they have to sign the evidence out of secured storage, do the testing, sign it back in. You can see the envelope in the top center. So they're getting evidence exactly as they would be getting it in a crime lab. So you can see it's actually sealed with evidence tape. They learn how to open it appropriately. We had several students that didn't understand that concept. So it was, very enlightening, teaching them exactly how you'd have to handle that. We don't want to break any seals, things like that. And then as you kind of look around the edges, we have the window, which was a burglar broke into a house, got some of the glass stuck in his clothing. They were able to use physical match to place that suspect at the crime scene. There is a suspected arson case, and so a fingerprint was found on a gas can. In the bottom left, there's a pelvis, so you could identify what gender that this person was. So we found remains in the woods, trying to identify who the missing person is. We have some fibers down there. We have an IR spectra, and you can even see we have some firearms and different drug chemistry. So we give the students a variety of evidence, and it really has given them a great opportunity to get some specific hands-on experience, not just in what we want to offer as part of our coursework, but what is really interesting to the students themselves. So this is very specifically based on what students are most interested in, and we gear each case specifically to that student. So that is pretty much all we have for today. I appreciate you listening to us, and I apologize that we can't interact with you more, but we're excited to hear your questions. I'm not sure if they're going to leave this up, but at least if you would like to take down our contact information, we'd be happy to answer any questions you may have via email. But also, we're excited about the Q&A section of this, and I'm going to turn it over to Laurie now.
Wow, that was awesome. That is so cool. There's so many neat things about the forensics program that I didn't even know. You guys did a fantastic job. You make me want to go back to school and get a forensics degree. So fantastic. I'm sure that everyone in the audience enjoyed it as well. And I hope if you were thinking about a career in forensics that they really kind of piqued your interest. I'm going to get to some of the questions that we have now. Now, some of them you've answered a little bit. I think we can build upon them a little bit. The first question I'm going to actually give to Professor Wise, and this is from Allie in the audience. She said, how are research projects done in the forensic science concentration? Now, I think that Professor Yackel just kind of answered that a lot in terms of you can pick your own thing or we can give you a case study. But I guess I'll kind of add to that and say, how involved are the faculty, if at all, in assisting students with the research project? Is there guidance to make sure they're on the right path? Do they kind of coach them to ensure they're doing things correctly? I'll let you answer that.
So yeah, I think we have a lot of research a lot of support available to the students. So I think depending on what track the student decides to follow, if they're doing their own research or if they're doing a case study, we're going to be there to support. You're going to have an advisor you're going to meet with at least for an hour every single week just to discuss your research as you set it up and as you continue through your analysis. That's one thing that's great about having the 2 semesters of study is this is not a race to the end of the finish line. This really is, let's put the thought into it. Let's determine what the scientific probative value of this evidence is, or how could my research help and benefit people in my community or, larger nationwide. So you definitely have support. I think one thing that's interesting is we also allow students to have a lot of cognitive thought themselves. So there are different ways that you can look at different types of evidence. It's not always going to be a predictable way or a very clear analytical scheme. So we've had students who have come in with different types of ideas that are very applicable to the situation and very valid. So the students also really teach us a lot, and they also bring a lot to the table. But we're definitely there to support them and to also harness that, critical thinking. What would you do if you were the scientist in this case?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And the next question is going to be for Professor Yackel. But before I do that, I want to let folks on the line know we actually have a bunch of other webinars that have been pre-recorded, and we're going to put that address up here in the Q&A section. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that one of the, I think it was the 4th webinar that we did was about student support. So we had folks on there from our Career Services Department, as well as our Experiential Learning, and that's just a fancy word for internships. So if you want to learn more about how those 2 departments help and coordinate with students and with faculty to get those things done, please, go out and take a look at that video as well. So on to that. As far as internships, Professor Yackel, when can students take them on? Is there specific guidelines on what year they have to wait? Can they get something earlier if they qualify? How does that work?
Sure. So I think the internships are typically done junior year. There are some requirements as far as we have a couple courses that are required beforehand. So students are always welcome to do internships that are not for credit. So if you find something before that you're really interested in and that you want to pursue, you're more than welcome to do that. But what we want is that you go into the field and actually present yourself as well as the university very respectfully and actually have a base understanding of the different topics in forensic science before you just get out into the field. So, as a freshman, incoming freshman who hasn't had any forensic science courses yet, and then they're going to intern at the coroner's office, they have a really hard time adjusting to what's expected of them, some of the terminology that they may not be familiar with, and stuff like that. So we typically suggest that our students start looking like summer before junior year, so that in the junior year or senior year that they can take that internship. And then, like you said, we have a great experiential learning department who helps, marry students with the appropriate opportunities that are available out there. And they're constantly looking for new ones. So they do a really great job with that.
Okay, and I'm going to stick with you for a second, and we're going to piggyback on that. We have a question from a parent in the audience. And her daughter was offered a chance to work in a DC crime lab when she was ready to go to college. Would we be able to accept hours work toward the internship hours needed? And I don't know if you know the answer to that, but it's an interesting question. So, and Professor Wise, if you look like you might have something to say too. So I don't care. I don't know if that's really more of a question for, you know, the registrar's office or for experiential learning, but do you have any thoughts or do you know anything about that?
So I can just speak to what has happened with some previous students where they've had positions that really apply to, you know, whatever concentration they're pursuing, and those have then been applied as their internship credit. So it has been done in the past. I don't know that it's been done if it's done previous to attending Harrisburg University, but Harrisburg is pretty flexible, I would say, and so they tend to want to work with you and try and figure out what's the best course of action for the student. So if it makes the most sense for them for this to qualify as their internship, I'm sure they'd be willing to work with the student on that.
Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much. And now I'm going to take it back to Professor Carrie Wise. Carrie, we actually have two questions out here about FEPAC accreditation. Somebody wanted to ask about it in general, and then it was mentioned by Professor Yackel during the presentation. But we have a question here from Generette, and I hope I said your name right. Does receiving a forensics degree before the FEPAC accreditation hinder job prospects? When is the accreditation tentatively set to be granted?
So the accreditation process is quite long. It is several years long. The purpose of that is that FEPAC has the highest quality standard set by any means. So I think it's beneficial to still graduate from a program that's in the process of becoming FEPAC accredited, because we're still doing and meeting all of the requirements that they're asking. The big regulation from them is that we have to graduate 2 full classes before we're able to finish our accreditation process. Up until then, we're meeting every single one of those requirements. So I do think that it'll still be very beneficial for your education. And I do think that other universities and other laboratories in the area are recognizing that we're going for this accreditation, which makes you a better candidate when looking for jobs.
Right, and I know we have an incredible reputation, especially with local employers and things like that. I don't think we've had any concerns about your employability after graduation. And I know with most accreditations, like right now, our RN to BSN program is in the process of accreditation, and once that's attained, it's going to be retroactive. Do you know if that's the case with FEPAC? And if you don't, it's fine to say I don't know the answer, but do you have any idea if that's kind of the case?
That I am not sure about. Nothing that I've read has given that information, but we can definitely look into that and maybe follow up with that student as well.
Yeah. Anyone that has questions about FEPAC accreditation, what I'm going to do is encourage you to email us here at admissions by emailing undergraduateadmissions@harrisburgu.edu. And I think we'll probably put that up in the Q&A area as well in a minute, because we can get that answer. That's a really good question, and really important, and I'm so glad to hear that people in our audience know what FEPAC is, because that means they're really serious about forensics, right? That's good. All right, fantastic. We have a question here. It's an anonymous person in our audience, and I'll go back to Dr. Yackel, since we're kind of going back and forth. Professor Yackel, I keep calling you guys doctors. My fault. Maybe soon. What's the difference between forensic biology and forensic chemistry? I think I'm asking that question correctly.
Okay, sure. So forensic biology is really dealing with bodily fluids and trying to determine their origin. So what species, as well as what type of bodily fluid they are. And then also identifying the person based off of DNA analysis. Forensic chemistry is dealing with actual physical chemicals. So that's when you're talking about, dealing with controlled substances, so marijuana or cocaine, seizures, things like that. Dealing with more of the actual botanical materials or the chemicals that are being produced. And I don't know if maybe they were questioning what toxicology is, because it's very similar to chemistry. Toxicology is is basically forensic chemistry, but in the body. So once someone has taken the drug, now that becomes toxicology. So again, once someone ingests marijuana or alcohol, testing it in bodily fluids, that's now becomes toxicology.
All right, and we're getting down to the wire here, so I'm going to ask one more question. And to the audience, if we did not get to your questions, please don't be too upset. We will be glad to answer them after the case. If you did not get to write down the names and email addresses of our presenters today, again, you can email undergraduateadmissions@harrisburgu.edu and we'll get you their information. And I know they'd be more than happy to answer questions via email or by phone if you'd like to over the summer. So we have one more question about, can this webinar be seen at any time? Yes, I did mention earlier it will be recorded and we will be sending it out to everyone who registered. It may take 24 hours for that to get downloaded, but we will get that out. So the last question I have for you, Professor Wise, is can you give us an idea about entry-level salaries that a student might be able to expect once they look for employment with a bachelor's degree in forensics?
So that is a really big range, to be quite honest with you. So crime scene positions or forensic investigators working with the medical examiner's office, those types of jobs are going to be probably within the mid to upper 40 to 50 starting point. When you talk about the laboratory jobs and what you're utilizing more of your biology and chemistry background and start into laboratory, then you're going to start more towards a $50,000 starting year point. The challenge with that is it's always going to be where you're located, what your specific field is that you're trying to get into, how many people there are in that field, how valuable you are in that field. So all of those different questions definitely come into play. Whenever people bring up salary, it's extremely important, especially when you're going to invest in your degree. And that's a lot of consideration. But also remember the fact that you're giving back to the community. And not to be corny, that really is priceless. I started crime scene making $32,000 a year. And that was back in 2007, so not that long ago. But the amount of work you do and you give back to the community is absolutely fantastic. And all the different people you meet and the different lives that you impact. Also being said, one additional perk is a lot of the employment opportunities are going to exist in your local, state, and federal government agencies. So that normally would also include a good retirement, good health, as well as an additional layer of job security. So different things to look at, especially with everything else going on outside of just the cost of income.
Very good. Good plug. I agree. Anytime you work for a local, state, or even federal government, the benefits are usually amazing and complement the salary very nicely and put you in a very comfortable position. And yes, a lot of job security in this field, unfortunately. You know what I mean? That's not going to go away. So wonderful. Gosh, you guys did a wonderful job today. We appreciate you being here so much. I'm sure I speak for everyone in the audience. They appreciate you taking the time to come and speak to us today. I want to thank everybody in the audience. Again, we'll get this out to you as soon as it is downloaded, so you have it to look at. And when you go to look at that, you'll be able to view any of the other pre-recorded webinars that we have as well. With that being said, we hope that you either decide to join the HU family, or if you're a high school junior, apply this summer. Starting in August, you can start applying. And if you are a sophomore or junior, come visit us when we're back open. Everybody have a wonderful Friday and a great weekend. Thank you. Bye-bye.